Hey, this is the Fight Nerd, and joining us now is Dr. Paul Bowman from Cardiff University in the UK, who is featured prominently in the new documentary I Am Bruce Lee, and is also the author of the excellent book Theorizing Bruce Lee. Dr. Bowman, how are you today?
Hello, yes, I'm great. It's great to be on the show.
Well, thank you for joining us. First things first, what got you interested in Bruce Lee and the martial arts?
Bruce Lee has always been a big part of my life. From a child, I grew up in the 70s, and Bruce Lee was the king of everything. He was the definitive pinnacle of martial arts. And ever since a child, I'd always loved Bruce Lee. And it was always Bruce Lee when I did any martial arts. It was, when I did every kick I did, it was a Bruce Lee kick. Every punch was a Bruce Lee punch. So Bruce Lee is the start of my interest in martial arts, and he's still there now. All these years later, he's still very central to my interests.
And you also do practice martial arts, correct?
I do. But ironically, I practice I practice the ones he would have called useless. I practice Tai Chi at the moment, and also Choi Li Foot Kung Fu, which was the kind of notorious opposition to the Wing Chun, martial artists in Hong Kong. It was always the Choi Li Foot people that fought the Wing Chun people in the myths and legends of Bruce Lee's teenage years. But I never really got into any Chinese martial art when I was young enough to really be able to do the Jeet Kune Do or the Wing Chun. It was always Taekwondo and kickboxing and stuff. So as I got older, I found a Tai Chi instructor. I didn't know anything about Tai Chi and just instantly fell in love with Chinese martial arts at that point.
All right, well, as you may or may not know, Bolo Young, who was in Enter the Dragon, he also practiced Tai Chi, so I'm sure Bruce would be okay with that.
Well, yeah, Bruce Lee did. In that famous Pierre Burton interview, Bruce Lee demonstrates some quite reasonable-looking Tai Chi himself. I think he had family members who did Tai Chi. So, Bruce, I think he was interested in all different sorts of martial arts, wasn't he? And he researched them. But he was a young man, and he was very headstrong, and for him it was all about speed and direction and force and efficiency. And Tai Chi is it's an older, slower martial art, isn't it? It's for old people like me.
On that topic, do you think if Bruce had lived many more years, do you think that his form of Jeet Kune Do would kind of change as he began to mature?
I think that he said that explicitly. He would say this to Dan Inosanto, what we're doing now, we won't be doing next year, and we won't be doing next year. And I think there's that spirit of innovation and experimentation with Bruce Lee, which is really, really admirable. And you see it coming through today in the proliferation of new martial arts. That I think you can see a continuity between what Bruce Lee was doing and what people are doing, like in say Casey fighting method and in mixed martial arts and things like this. It's like innovation, what works, what doesn't work. And tradition is secondary, absolutely secondary to what works here and now. And I think that's to be respected. That's part of Bruce Lee's legacy.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about the new documentary coming out, which is called I Am Bruce Lee, and you were interviewed for the film as well. So tell us what it was like to be basically on the other side of the coin, if you will, in this case, be interviewed for a film about Bruce.
It was a really big surprise. It was excellent. I got an email from the director, Pete McCormack, and I didn't know anything about it. And then I didn't think they were serious. I thought they just wanted to pick my mind about, I thought they wanted to do a bit of research. But then it turned out they wanted me to come, so they flew me from the UK to New York, and I had a weekend in New York, which was great. I've never been to New York before. And then we did about a 3-hour interview on the Monday morning, and then I flew back home. It was great fun. It was brilliant. And the production company were great, and they were very interested in what I would have to say about Bruce Lee as an academic and a cultural theorist and a philosopher and so on. So it was really interesting to be part of it. I was really proud, really, really touched to be asked. And I've seen the finished documentary now, and it's a wonderful film. It's absolutely excellent.
Yeah, it's definitely a must-see for all Bruce Lee and martial arts fans.
It really is. And I think it does something unique, because there's a lot of legend and there's a lot of vagueness about Bruce Lee. Who did he fight? When did he fight? When did he develop this? This film, it talks to, his family and his friends, and it puts dates, it puts times and names and places. It's very precise about what happened when, and you don't see that in any other Bruce Lee documentary. You don't even get it in many books about Bruce Lee. What actually happened when? Who was Bruce Lee with? What did he do? I think this this is what's unique about the film. I think this is one of the really strong points of it. You know, everyone knows a lot about Bruce Lee, but it's all a bit vague. You know, who did he train? Was he the toughest man in the world? And all of this kind of stuff. And it really asks those questions, and it backs them up with evidence.
Very true. Now, you did mention the word myth there, so I just kind of wanted to ask this question now. Do you think that Bruce's life, as well as some of his work, kind of followed the chart of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey?
I think that what you get with Bruce Lee is like you get with any great kind of icon or figure, is people make it into a myth, you know. So he was a guy who had failings, as anyone has their failings, but he had a sort of spirit of innovation and everything. And so any event in Bruce Lee's life becomes a kind of a parable. You know, people read it for deeper significance and deeper meaning. You know, when Bruce Lee had a fight with Wong Jackman, and it took him too long to beat this guy, then Bruce Lee sat down, had to think about it and what his system, and then he revised his system. And this has the structure of a kind of allegory. You know, it's a parable about the master and the master's creation and the master's genius. And it's similar to so many types of story. You know, the Bruce Lee's life is put into a kind of a narrative format that, you know, Hollywood films love, that kind of structure, you know. But it's a classical kind of narrative structure that you see again and again. You know, all great historical figures become this mythological figure as well at the same time, you know. So yeah, it obeys the structure of a lot of different narratives. He becomes this larger than life figure, you know.
Now, what would you say makes the I Am Bruce Lee documentary so different from all the other documentaries that have been done on Bruce?
I think that there's two things. One is the precise, correct detail that you get from his students, his friends, his family, but then also you get the opinions of like a younger generation of people who've been inspired by Bruce Lee. So people you wouldn't automatically associate with Bruce Lee, you know, young pop stars and athletes and so on, all of whom are talking about the significance that Bruce Lee played in their life. So, you know, that Mickey Rourke plays a large part in it. You don't necessarily think, oh, Mickey Rourke is connected to Bruce Lee, but Mickey Rourke is saying, you know, this guy moved us and inspired us, and he was always there, you know, when I was training, when I was fighting. So this documentary is a mixture of, you know, celebrity talking heads, but they're there to talk about the wide impact of Bruce Lee on culture. So it's, on the one hand, it's precise biographical detail, and on the other hand, it's about the wider cultural and historical significance of Bruce Lee, which is quite wide, I think.
All right, now I'd like to talk a little bit about your book, which is called Theorizing Bruce Lee, and I wanted to ask, you know, what gave you the impetus in the first place to write a book about the philosophical side of Bruce Lee and his films?
Well, I work in cultural theory, mainly cultural studies and cultural theory, and when I would be at university, you know, doing my master's and my PhD, and people would be telling me about these complicated theories about post-colonial politics and ethnic politics and race representation and you know, racial struggles and so on. And I would think Bruce Lee's really important here, and I would often say that to people, and they would just kind of laugh, because for them Bruce Lee was just an action movie star. But then when I started to connect up Bruce Lee deliberately with some really big issues in cultural theory about, you know, like globalization and the cinema and you know, racism and civil rights movements and all the rest of it, Bruce Lee looms quite large on the landscape. And you think about, he was the first Asian male lead in a Hollywood film, in the first Hollywood martial arts film. You know, his significance is important. He really kind of globalized the term kung fu. So I started off kind of tentatively writing about Bruce Lee, and it gained momentum. And I wrote the book, and I thought, well, no one's going to read this. And it turns out that loads of people have read it, and loads of people really like it. So I've had contact from martial artists from all over the world, from other academics, from people in China, people in California, you know, who said, you know, thank you for taking Bruce Lee seriously, because Bruce Lee was always a big part of our lives, and no one's really spent the time to actually focus on the significance of his films. So that was the story of it, really.
I can imagine there must have been an insane amount of research put into this to go over all the philosophers and all the different psychologists who were linked to many of Bruce's theories. So tell us how you actually managed to put all this together into one cohesive book.
Well, I did try to cover everything in the world. I just thought I want to think about the significance of Bruce Lee when it comes to film, when it comes to the idea of fantasy, like, about male fantasies. What is it about, what is it to be a man, to be tough, and all the rest of it. So the subtitle is Film, Fantasy, Fighting, Philosophy. So the book focuses on his films. It focuses on the way in which the films have affected people. It affected me. It affected millions of people across the world to think, right, this is what I want to do now. I no longer want to be anything other than a kung fu martial artist inspired by Bruce Lee. And then looked at the way the philosophy kind of played itself out in his films. So it's film, fantasy, fighting. Yeah, I looked at his impact in martial arts, his impact on martial arts, and the way that he used philosophical ideas throughout the films and so on. So it wasn't trying to do everything. It was organized by these 4 sub-themes, these 4 strands, really. So I'm not trying to do everything. I was just grouping some of the really big aspects of his intervention into the world. So I didn't know everything. I don't know everything. I haven't read all of the philosophers that he's obviously read. I've read a different range of philosophers and a different range. But, in broad brushstrokes, I kind of wanted to just say that these are the areas that Bruce Lee was most significant in terms of.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about the philosophers and philosophies behind Bruce now, starting with Jeet Kune Do and the motto of Jeet Kune Do, which is having no way as way. Now, what do you believe influenced Bruce to come up with that concept?
I think that with Bruce Lee, you get, this was the late 60s going into the early 70s. This is the tail end of the counterculture, ideas of yin and yang, and Buddhism and especially Zen. They're very fashionable in America at that time. And Bruce Lee is a kind of a sort of a representative of this kind of countercultural connection to the East. Actually, if you look at a lot of the theorists and thinkers and philosophers that Bruce Lee is reading, he's reading them in translation, he's reading them in English. He's reading philosophers like Alan Watts. Alan Watts is a thinker who translated kind of Chinese and Japanese philosophy into the English language. And Bruce Lee's he's getting his ideas from Zen, from Buddhism and related philosophies, and just kind of translating those terms and changing words like, you've just changed one word, so he's talking about Jeet Kune Do rather than fencing or rather than Taoism, So he's mapping out his philosophy about martial arts by using the format of various kind of Taoist and Buddhist insights. That's mainly where it's coming from.
Okay. Now, something that you mentioned in the documentary was about Fists of Fury, and that in the original Chinese version, it's much more of a nationalistic movie than it is in the American dub. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that and how the socio-political structure of that film was changed for the various languages that it was dubbed in.
Yeah, that's a very interesting film. So it has a number of different titles for a start, and then it's depending on which country you're watching it and everything. But I'll call it Fist of Fury, and it's the one that's set in Shanghai in the start of the 20th century. And Shanghai is occupied by the Japanese. And it's about, it's very nationalistic. It's about the assassination of a great Chinese patriot by the Japanese. So it's very anti-Japanese, very anti-colonial film. But when it was dubbed into English, you lose a lot of that. You lose a lot of the politics of it. So what you can do now with the DVD releases, so you couldn't have done this before, and we would never have known. I didn't know. I'd watched the dubbed versions when I was a child and when I was younger. But if you watch it in English, say, with the English subtitles, the subtitles are a more recent addition, and you see there's a lot of the conversations that they're having are about different things, and this takes place in the subtitles, which are truer to the Cantonese original. And in the subtitles, they're talking about the Japanese colonial power and how little power the Chinese have and how much power the Japanese have, and even if they've done this terrible assassination, there's nothing they can do about it. And that's all simplified in the dubbed version, which was the first version that Westerners got. So, the reception of these films in the West was one of it was just kind of slapstick. It was just about baddies and goodies, and the Japanese are just baddies for no clear reason. So if you actually watch the subtitle version, you realise that it's actually quite a complex setup. You just don't get that. You don't get that at all in the dubbed version. The dubbed version is a simplification of a complicated film, which is one of the reasons why Westerners tend to laugh at the idea of martial arts films as being significant, because there's a political dimension to it in China, where in the Chinese version, which isn't there in the English version, but also that's known widely in, say, for example, in Japan. And I have it on quite good authority that Fist of Fury has never been shown on terrestrial Japanese television because it's so passionately anti-Japanese. And this is played out in different ways. The idea of in that film, the Japanese deliver a plaque at the funeral which says "Sick Man of Asia," and that was the way that China had been referred to throughout the 19th century. China had been called the Sick Man of Asia. So that choice of term in that film is very, very historically loaded as well, So the film is significant in the East Asian context, and in the West, that's all lost. It's all gone. So that's the kind that interests me.
Yeah, it's a very, very big change, and additionally onto that, many of Bruce's movies thematically dealt with the ideas of race, which also later expanded into self-identity. So where do you believe Bruce got some of his ideas on identity, and how did that begin to shape his later work?
Well, I think, in the films, the three Hong Kong films, you see him playing, a Chinese ethnic, working class boy kind of thing. And these are very nationalist films, but actually Bruce Lee was living in California, and he was much more interested in that kind of egalitarian ethos of we're all actually equal. So in the Hong Kong films, Bruce Lee is playing a nationalist, and that nationalism, there's still the nationalism to Bruce Lee. He's still proud of his Chinese heritage. Bruce Lee's actively against the simplification and the kind of racist reductions of Chinese people to kind of arsehole, that horrible kind of pantomime sense of what a Chinese person is like. So he wants to redress a racist representation of Asian men. He wants to change that. At the same time as as part of that, he wants to kind of champion Chinese culture and Chinese martial arts. At the same time as he wants to say, but guys, we're all equal. We've all got 2 fists and 2 feet, and that's we're equal in that respect. So you see, it's a mixture. Everyone's a mixture. Everyone has contradictory sort of beliefs at the same time. But I think that Bruce Lee was anti-racist, but you still get a sense through anecdotal evidence that I've heard about his life that he had a problem with Japan because of the relationship between China and Japan, and obviously he had a problem with England and with British identity because Hong Kong was British colonial territory. But basically, the Californian sort of version of Bruce Lee is one of egalitarianism. We're all equal. Let's put this race stuff behind us. So you get 2 different messages at the same time.
So personally, what would you say is your favorite Bruce Lee movie?
My favorite Bruce Lee movie is Fist of Fury. I think the most significant one is Enter the Dragon, but my favorite one is Fist of Fury. I think Enter the Dragon was the first one that Westerners saw, on a massive scale. So it's a bit like the question, who's more important, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones? And you think, well, musically, the Rolling Stones are much more significant than the Beatles, but the impact of the Beatles, even though they weren't as good a band as the Rolling Stones. So I think that even though Enter the Dragon is nowhere near as good a film as Fist of Fury, it's probably the more important. But I would prefer to watch Fist of Fury.
Well, in your opinion, if Game of Death had been finished the way that Bruce had originally intended it to be made, how much do you think that would have revolutionized both martial arts films in America and just the entire Chinese film genre entirely?
Well, I don't know. Something? I've come out recently and started saying, actually, from what I've seen of that film, it doesn't look like it was going to be very good. Now what I'm saying here is controversial. Everyone kind of goes, "Oh my God, it was going to be his masterpiece. It was going to be the best film ever." Now, and I don't know what kind of improvements you can make to a film between shooting these first goes of the scenes and then producing a final, honed and refined version. But from what I've seen, it looked a bit weak, I thought, actually. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was going to be a magnificent film. But I've never been that impressed with the choreography and so on that I saw in that film. But as I said, I think that's because you're looking at a first rough draft of something, unfinished rough draft, and then we're expected to judge it. Now, most Bruce Lee fans go, "Oh, this was going to be the best film ever." And my position is, well, I'd see no evidence of that. It looks a bit ropey to me. What do you think? I don't know.
All right, we'll let my YouTube commenters worry about that one, because I'm sure they're gonna have a field day with that comment. So we'll move on.
Okay, yeah, I know I'm in deep water here, aren't I?
Oh yeah, we're not gonna touch that one again. Now, why is Bruce Lee still so relevant nearly 40 years after his passing?
Because he was the first, and because the generation that were most moved by Bruce Lee, the people who saw Bruce Lee the first time, we're still around. They're still around. They're older and in positions of power and so on. And like Bruce Lee was the person that got so many people into this. But also, I think that Bruce Lee was never just an actor, in the sense that Jackie Chan, Jet Li, these are actors who do Chinese martial arts, but they don't have the kind of power or force that Bruce Lee had, because Bruce Lee was the first Asian male lead to do these things. So black people, Hispanics, diasporic Chinese across the world, Asians, had not seen a non-white hero, doing these things, beating so many people, beating white people. And I think that you have to remember the ethnicity of it. It's a really, really important thing. Not only have you got the power of Bruce Lee's, performance and the skill and the speed of it, but the guy is an underdog, and he's not white. And I think that makes a huge difference, which I think you see that influence maturing in the kind of mid-90s with the Wu-Tang Clan, that kind of kung fu obsessed hip-hop and rap music. I think that was the generation most influenced by Bruce Lee really coming to maturity. But you just need to see the films, and you just go, oh my God, this is amazing. The passion. I think Bruce Lee was a great actor, and I think that the films themselves had a lot going for them as films. Very simple text. I mean, all action films are very simple in their plot and in their execution, but I think that the kind of sentiments that organise the films are very, very passionate sentiments. But as I say, I think it was the time and the place, end of the 60s, start of the 70s. This guy was the first, and you've got a kind of ethnic rage there as well, which was crucial throughout the 60s and 70s. So I think that's one reason, and just the sheer beauty of it, the skill and the speed and the beauty. He was the first. He was fast. Brilliant performance.
All right, so the film is I Am Bruce Lee. You guys can check out more information about that on IamBruceLee.com, and you can find ways to see the film. And Dr. Bowman's book is Theorizing Bruce Lee. You guys can check out a link for it on my site for Amazon, or just go directly to Amazon.com or your favorite online book retailer for it. Dr. Bowman, we appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for educating the masses about Bruce Lee.
Well, thank you very much for having me.